Want to welcome everybody to this morning's panel discussion. Should OEMs bring manufacturing back in-house? IP protection and lack of supply chain and manufacturing visibility are driving OEMs to reconsider their outsourcing strategies, especially given the efforts to be more sustainable and reduce the length of their supply chain and carbon footprint. Is it time to reverse this process? I have a really interesting panel to discuss this morning. We are joined by Jim Apfel from Naprotek. Welcome, Jim.
Yep, good morning.
Good morning. And then we also have another contract manufacturer, Michael Wallace from Urtech Manufacturing. Welcome, Michael.
Good morning.
Okay. And then our resident oracle, Gene Weiner from Gene Weiner International Associates. Welcome, Gene.
Good morning, everybody, or good evening, as the case may be.
Yeah, true. That's true. Great. Okay, so let's get started and see where we go with this discussion today. So my first question is going to be, what are the benefits for an OEM to outsource manufacturing? So that should be an easy start for you. Michael, do you want to take it away?
Sure. I mean, the benefits are very compelling. You can, if properly executed, you can lower your product cost. You can you can help your operating cash flow. You don't have to invest in equipment, facilities, potentially even your inventory outlay. And then you have the simplification of your organization. You don't have to manage a production floor and the support staff for that as well.
Right. So
to me, those are the biggest ones, and there's certainly some others.
Yeah, absolutely. So would you concur with that, Jim? I mean, obviously, the capital outlay is you avoid that, and it's off your balance sheet. But also, you have the benefits of the purchasing the purchasing scale that you have to be able to pass that on to customers.
Yeah. I would agree with Michael. So I think we're starting off with sort of the positives, right? If you go to a low-cost region, you get that benefit of maybe labor, definitely closer to maybe some of the supply chain. And then there's the challenges, right? So over the last couple of years, especially with COVID, there's been maybe some issues with respect to taking things offshore. So that's maybe a bias toward North America, but historically, it's certainly been the way to go, especially for volume. Stable designs, etc.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that some of the OEMs have been saying to me during the COVID and supply chain issues was the lack of visibility they had. And how much visibility do you give your OEM customers into your supply chain?
Back to me, yeah. So that's moving down the page in terms of things like transparency. We try to give our customers as much transparency with respect to their supply chain as we can. The markets we serve are more focused on things like defense, space, and medical. So within limits, we share, but then we've got an awful lot of regulations that restrict things like ITAR and et cetera. So we have to conform to certain bodies that restrict things, but the goal is to serve the customer. So as much as we can, provide insights to what's going on with their product.
Right. Okay. So, Gene, maybe I can come to you and say, are there any benefits to bringing it back in-house for an OEM?
Of course, there are benefits. There are benefits, and there are also negatives. The benefits would be increased quality, time to market, reduced shipping costs, reduced inventory, better communications, and lower overall costs. But there are also disadvantages, which we'll hold until later.
Okay, well, that's quite a lot there. So okay, so when reshoring, should EMS companies consider Mexico first? That's another area as well. What activities, do you have any activities down in Mexico, Jim?
We have two partners that are using Naprotek at the front end of their design, and they've chose Mexico as their low-cost region support. So we have two that are going through transfers. They're in the industrial space, so a little bit different market that needs more price sensitivity. And in this case, they're fairly large products, so the ability to ship it back into North America or into US is very convenient getting across Mexico.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's quite interesting. I mean, obviously, a lot of you guys have partners, offshore partners, when your customers want to scale up to high volume. But
Trevor, if I could pitch in on this one?
yeah,
You don't mind?
absolutely.
So, you know, when you look at supplier selection, which is one of the big risk mitigation factors if you're in particularly China, but in Asia in general, if you look at the government policies that are in China, basically China wants to be an OEM. They don't want to be an EMS. You know, they want to be Apple. They don't want to be on high, Foxconn.
Right.
And then, you know, and with the US in particular, there's tariffs. So they're disencouraging. Why are they incentivized to help a US or a North American based OEM be successful versus that's what they want to be? So Mexico is actually less expensive now, labor cost wise, or equally expensive if you want to, but the rate of acceleration in pricing has been higher in Asia, particularly China, than it has been in Mexico. It's been relatively flat, you know, year to year. Right. So in the government programs in Mexico are very supportive of manufacturing and particularly electronics manufacturing, and they're putting out programs to have enhance the workforce and offering the IMEX program that I think Gina was talking about beforehand, and the shelter programs to make things, you know, to invest easier. So I think North America, you know, is a no-brainer versus North Americans in OEMs in North America, where their customer is in North America. It's a no-brainer to be in Mexico.
Yeah. No, I certainly agree with you. And the whole thing is that it's also reducing the risk. You know, it's shortening the supply chain. You're not having to ship stuff halfway across the world, so it's not sitting on the sea for 3 weeks or a month. It's just reducing the risk for any of these geopolitical events that can happen, you know, anywhere across the world. Would you agree with that, Gene? Have you got anything to add to that?
Well, I think from my viewpoint for North America, Mexico is the new China. As recently as a month ago, I saw numbers showing that the shift from Asia and Southeast Asia to manufacturing or EMS manufacturing or assembly will be 18 to 20% or more during the next 5 years versus the 6 to 8% of the past 5. I learned of over 120 systems in Asia being disassembled, reconditioned, and being shipped to Mexico to start up. We see Chinese companies going there. We see Taiwanese companies going there. First, they go to Thailand, they go to Vietnam, and there's not much room left there. They go to Mexico. It's a natural event. We have Samsung there now too. We have Intel there. We have almost everybody there. And there are a few safe cities, large populations with university, besides Guadalajara, which everybody knows about, such as Querétaro with over 2 million people, major universities, a so-called safe city. The cartels aren't there, and the government's guaranteeing protection to operations that go there. The thing that's missing from Mexico are the bare boards or the flexible substrates, printed circuits, maybe 3 in the country. And they talk about, lack of water, lack of this, lack of that. But in today's technology, water usage is greatly reduced. Desalinization is available in over 17,000 operations around the world in over 50, 60 countries, and can be set up near Guadalajara or some of these operations. So I look forward to Mexico increasing its EMS business, I also learned small companies such as Esmtech are going direct in Mexico. They went directly from IPC Apex to Mexico to set up. I also know several of the major other suppliers of equipment at the show said they're getting big orders and increases in Mexico. So I think Mexico is a natural thing, lower cost, close to the country, more trained workers, greater 20, 30 years experience now, starting with the old maquiladoras at the border, now moving further inland to central Mexico, as well as southern Mexico. So I say Mexico's a good choice. Not only for the EMS business and their suppliers, but for the future for bareboard people, and even for the OEMs, which should be taking a new approach. I don't think they can afford to go into a bricks and mortar again and building for a number of reasons.
Okay. Well, I mean, you've raised a number of points there. I mean, certainly one of the interesting things that I noticed about the companies coming from China and Taiwan into Mexico is that, you know, back home, they were typically using a lot of the cheaper Chinese equipment for their manufacturing. But when they open up in Mexico, they're buying best in class Western equipment.
Yes.
Which is very important, because otherwise they wouldn't be able to compete, quite frankly. So that's certainly one thing. The other thing is, though, that is there the same labor shortages that we have in the United States here, for example? Is that less acute in Mexico?
Absolutely less acute. The problem is there's a large unemployment factor in Mexico still, but we're training people. We have experienced people. It's less acute. The factories that are setting up there are going to greater, say, closer to factory of the future with greater automation and robotics. So what they need is fewer but better trained labor or engineers, and the universities are turning them out.
Right. I mean,
I agree that the rates are lower now. There is going to be, as we've all talked about, the demand is increasing there, so there probably will be some price pressure in the future. But there's it isn't just Asian companies going to North America. It's North American OEMs not going back to Asia. Now I have several of those accounts where it's anything they have, the current revision may stay in Asia, but next rev or next iteration of a product line, that's where the big decision is, you know, are they going to go to Asia? And
well, this brings in another issue. We see more and more high mix short runs in newer products with quicker time to market and shorter life in the field. This works against an OEM going into bringing everything back in house. And perhaps OEM should be taking a new approach, a different approach, in which they partner with OEMs and with their other suppliers, as in the old days when Intel used to dig right through the first tier, second tier, down to the supply line of materials and equipment, to jointly develop new products and to set up quick turn and spend some more money in R&D rather than ODM or just sending stuff out and not knowing where it goes. We need more trust, more partnerships, more working together, more R&D and investment from the OEM rather than just bricks and mortar, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I think another area where the OEM needs to invest more, and this is really where to me, before you decide to outsource, you really need to rethink your entire supply chain.
Yeah.
You know,
Yes.
And back at I remember the 80s, when SMT came out, some people made a hard decision. I'm not going to invest in capital, and they started outsourcing. So that's 4 decades ago. So there's companies that have been in business for years and years that haven't lost control of their supply chain to some extent, and people that are 20 years younger than we are, most of us there, that have never built a PCBA, and so. What I think is the OEMs need to get back to understanding the electronic, every component in their product arsenal. They own the supply chain, and if you look at the risks and benefits, the benefits are really on making the product. The supply chain piece has to be done whether you're making it yourself or making it through outsourcing it.
You're right. And what the OEM has to do is build the supply chain, not squeeze it dry.
Right, and then we as the
margins
help them do that. We present them with the data and help expand that and make it light. But more and more, we're getting into custom solutions where customers are providing some of the parts, or paying for them. We can't go out and be bankers and pipeline 2 years worth of parts for them because our customers want them to. So they are getting more involved, but they're not necessarily up to speed technologically or understand it. So we have to teach them.
Yeah, Trevor, these words are good for the panel. I heard short product life cycle. I heard engineering changes, rapid changes. That's why we exist. And even to Michael's point, the reason we're chosen by our partners is because we're getting more active in their supply chain. Sure, they own it, but it's truly a partnership, probably more so in the last 18 months than ever. Gene made a comment about bare fabs. Every CM now has to spend extra time on fab, on bill of material, on labor. And so you talk about the advantage of working with the folks on this panel. That's usually the reason we're selected, is for that very reason.
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
don't,
well-
you don't want to have a design going through rapid changes and short product life cycle, ramping in a low-cost region only to find out that you're in for another dramatic change. You need
Yeah.
to be closer to the design, sure.
And that's what I said earlier. I mean, I think you guys essentially are taking a lot of the risk or shortening the risk out of the product for these OEMs because you're much closer to the point of use. But one of the issues is, of course, the changing factory and the changing skill sets that are needed. There are still labor shortages in the United States, of course, but if you're trying to modernize your factory and bring in some of these systems that are going to improve your machine uptime and your quality and things like that, you're going to have the people that can basically understand the data and make sense of it. How much of a challenge are you finding that, Jim?
So there's a couple questions you asked. So in terms of upgrades to the factory, ours is mostly focusing on quick turn, rapid prototyping. We do an awful lot of quality inspection along the flow of our product. So automation is still one step away, I would say. We have two footprints, obviously, East and West Coast, where we do have some fully automated lines for custom RF manufacturing. But I think the answer to your question, our time is spent more on materials right now, material management, how to get product in the door so that we can make sure and ship product. That's been our biggest challenge, and it remains so. You can have one part. It's probably good you didn't have a semiconductor on your panel because some folks are still enjoying long lead times that slow everybody down, right? So in terms of investing in fairly expensive automated tool sets or things like that, we're still focusing more on the material side.
Right. Okay.
The equipment side, I think, is coming along quite nicely. There were a lot of new things at IPC Apex with versatile equipment, but it's still the material side. But if you look at basic materials, there's still only one glass sleeve in America, only one copper foil producer in America. A lot of the prepregs used in the US are made in Asia still and shipped in, refrigerated and pressed here. So the material set, a lot of the chemicals are now made in Asia, but they're still made in the US. It's kind of expensive to ship water across the Pacific Pond, but that will have to increase. It's easy to ship a truck up and down across the border, hoping it doesn't tip over, but go there. Good morning, Michael.
Yeah, it's glad to see that Michael's managed to join us. I know it's early morning for you out there, so thank you for coming in. And
glad to be a part of this.
Yeah, so we've been discussing, to sort of bring you up to speed, we've been discussing obviously the benefits of reshoring and some of the and working in much closer and shorter supply chains with Mexico, essentially. But certainly, to the point you were talking about there, Gene, I can't believe that companies like Ventec or AT&S and these guys aren't thinking about opening up plants in Mexico. I mean, it would make perfect sense for them, I would have thought. But
we can always ask them, and I know I'll be talking to the folks at Isola in the coming week, and I spoke to Mark Goodwin back at IPC, and I did not ask him that question. Maybe you did or someone else did, but they have to be thinking about that. But which is first, the chicken or the egg? It costs money to put in a modern laminate factory, but we don't have the printed circuit fabricators committing there yet.
I think the big area is the copper foil as well. And that's a big issue. There's only one big copper foil company over there. So
it takes 2 years to put together a copper foil factory to make the drums and for plating and so forth and so on, unless someone just takes one apart in Taiwan and ships it over.
Right.
One other point, if I may, of the OEMs that are in North America that have been outsourced in Asia and considering bringing it back, to North America. Over the course of time, some of these companies have been over there for 20, 30 years. And they don't have their ability, they don't have a domestic North American footprint at all for the EMS, but there might not be a good fit. They may have some high mix portion, lower volume that might be better suited to be in US, in Canada, or Canada and US themselves. and then put the higher volume stuff in Mexico. So they can start rethinking, and some of those transportation costs that you mentioned could be managed, or the supply chain, if they're involved in it, they can make those kind of decisions.
Yeah, I mean, Michael Hinshaw, I mean, that was one of the things we were discussing earlier, is that typically a lot of you contract manufacturers have partnerships offshore for customers that want to go into really high volume. And typically these partnerships have been in Asia, but it makes a lot more sense now, the way things are moving, to have that partnership down in Mexico. Do you have any sort of arrangements with green circuits in Mexico?
No, we don't. And in my conversations with customers, it truly does depend on the volumes that they're running and what types of products they're running. I think as you trend towards more sophisticated products, smaller volumes, there's I think a concerted effort to reshore. And quite frankly, I've had 4 conversations with customers, 2 of which have decided they're going to outsource to EMSs like ours, 2 of which have tried to insource and have struggled for several years to get operations running. And I think we're going to see similar challenges in Mexico with training, talent, getting equipment online. It's a tall hill to climb. The trend is coming, but it's going to be a while.
Yeah. Okay. Now, one of the things, Jim, that OEMs are always looking for is more data, and we just touched on it very lightly earlier on. But how much data should CEMs share with their OEM principals?
Yeah, we touched on this earlier. So we spend a lot of time on our campus with things like data management, making sure that we avoid any sort of counterfeiting, certificate of conformance. There's all kinds of processes and procedures that we have to follow for our customers.
Yeah.
But I think the answer to your question is doing everything we can to be as transparent with the data, with the exception that we have to follow rules. And so one of the reasons that we're in business for 25 plus years is following those rules. And it depends on the market that you're serving, but in terms of customers wanting to know more about what's going on with their product, whether it's the bill of material or whether it's work in progress that's in the factory, we do everything we can to keep them informed. We work in a quick turn environment, right? So they need answers in hours. I wish it was days or weeks, that'd be great. But it's typically on a daily basis how often we have to communicate on information about the data to the customers.
That question should be reversed. How much data should the OEM share with its EMS supplier?
That's
they hold
interesting.
back things that cause you a lot of difficulties. And further, one of the things that the OEMs can better do is much like the Japanese store Ford or GM are now doing, and that is buy some of the critical components for your EMS supplier. And they have the power of the purse to buy it. They may have more than 1, 2, or 3 different EMS suppliers, depending on the product line and quality required or volume. And they have the power to do it. They have to rethink how they are going to support their supply line. Like I say, don't squeeze it, build it.
Right.
Yeah, I concur with that. We see quite a bit of that in our space, where customers are buying parts, strategic components that they really have the only access to. And we partner with them. We have a pretty open pipeline. We have secure channels, encrypted data sharing. And as we learn things about their product and development, we intentionally help them prepare to transition to larger volumes if their product gets to scale, and teach them how to produce these things, because it's not always as simple as it appears.
Right. And that is, the creative supply chain, if you will, is increasing and has been for years. One example I have is, my company builds the North American product line for one of our customers, and an Asian company builds theirs. So the key components they actually buy, and then they allocate them out.
Right.
But that's how you would manage multiple, if you had more than one supplier. If in your title of this meeting is should they outsource? But more and more now, it's what Michael was just saying is that customers are taking control of their own destiny on those parts that are critical to keeping that revision of that design going.
Yeah.
We're helping them, provide them with that upfront information with lead time notices know,
It's giving them more security for sure. But
One of the things I saw a number of years ago that I don't see as much of today is when an EMS company is setting up a new line for an OEM, that the OEM would send a few engineers in to help debug it and get the yield up front before they turn the thing fully on. I don't see this anymore.
no, that's true. And then so much easier to do. Just staying on the topic of visibility for a moment. I mean, of course, you guys that are involved in or ITAR registered, for example, you're going to be limited by what you can, how much visibility you can give OEMs into your factories. I'm obviously correct in saying that. And it's got even tougher recently with it. Was it the CNCC legislation that came in? Let's see, what does a shorter supply chain mean less problems? You know, if we're able to shorten supply chain, so we're working between Mexico and United States and Canada, is that going to create less problems than you know, currently working from Asia? I would think it'd be pretty obvious. Who wants to talk about that? So let's start with you, Michael Hinshaw.
Yeah, so as I think about it, yes, absolutely. As I look at the shorter supply chains for our customers and doing EMS in Mexico, I think the real conundrum for the entire industry is components, boards, all the materials going into that, and that's going to still, for the foreseeable future, going to be made in Asia predominantly. We're going to have to live with the shipping and the timing, and for any OEM that decides to go to Mexico, I don't think it improves the supply chain problem a great deal. That said, I do think that's going to get solved. We'll start getting capacity back, start getting components. I think we faced, obviously, as everyone knows, a double hit with a sudden surge in demand and then a shutdown due to COVID. That's going to change. I think the bigger challenge is talent, training, and we are going to have to get to automation, because ultimately, I think that's how we become more cost effective globally.
Yeah.
Has anyone paid attention to what the IPC is doing in Mexico and putting all the training programs into Spanish and appointing a director general from Mexico? Apparently, they've trained thousands of workers down there at this point. That should help, and they're going full force on that in Spanish.
That's excellent. We need it.
Yeah.
Another aspect of the short cycle time is involving design. And so one of the things we've started to do is, when customers are getting a new product is let's just say you want to go through 3 design spins. You're going to have your alpha prototype, your beta, whatever your third. Is buying all that material at once up front. No, and then except for the raw boards and the parts you think will move, really starting to shrink that development time of getting, you're not getting lead time gated by prototyping.
That brings up another issue. Are you going to use modern design tools, or are you going to stay with Gerber and make the same mistake after mistake after mistake?
Our better customers now have mature PLM systems or those kind of things where we're actually pulling the documents right down, from them. But in the design phase, they're not actually, the PLM isn't populated yet. So there's a lot of work is being done before ERP happens, and quoting is part of that. And so we're working at, that's what we've developed is our quoting tools to work as if they're in MRP, and so we can launch the buy from quoting immediately. Because if you wait, they're gone. The last couple 3 years anyway.
There's some new tools available in Europe. One of them by a company in Munich called Luminovo that covers the quoting part and the inventory control and parts ordering. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's pretty new. Guy's a young Stanford graduate, and he's just out of the company a couple of years ago, and he's going like crazy in Europe.
Yeah. Another one out there is CalcuQuote. It's got real-time APIs into the component suppliers.
We use that. Shintan's a good guy. So that company, CalcuQuote, they're very, very open in working with OEMs and EMS companies, particularly EMS companies. Right. On new ideas and how to, they can buy material back and forth from each other and stuff like that.
Right. So I mean, it makes it much easier. You're getting real-time pricing and that sort of thing. You're not having to rely on, using the old DigiKey calculator to try and push your product. But you know, the lead times on NPI are getting shorter and shorter as well. So as Gene rightly says, you need to be looking at new modern tools, you know, such as you know, digital twins, and been able to bring in some additive printers to be able to do a quick turnaround product for somebody to get it. They could get an NPI out in a day, as it were, you know, because that's what the bigger companies are doing. That's what the Jables of this world are doing. You know, you guys have to sort of, I guess, slowly migrate towards that. You know, that brings me to my next question, and that is, are the tier 1 EMS companies widening the margins in services offered? Who wants to start out on that? Jim.
So my background is a tier 1, right? That's where I came from. So we stayed pretty close. We're a smaller CM, but we stay close to the tier 1s. I don't think they're changing their business dramatically. I think they're still focused on volume. The question is, are they chasing different services or margins? The folks that we work with, because we do work with an awful lot with tier 1s, they have a different set of rules. It's usually still focused on their primary offering, which is for higher volume. So I don't see it changing dramatically from our perspective. We still have a place in the world where we're at the front end of designs. In fact, probably more so than ever, our customers are staying with us even longer than moving to a tier 1.
Right.
So
This is I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, Michael, it's okay. So for the folks, I think on this panel, we exist because of our value add at that position in time. So whether it's quick turn prototyping all the way through NPI, people have a lot of definitions for NPI, by the way. And what does it mean to be high to medium volume, low to medium volume? So I think the reason people work with folks on this panel is because we give a really good service, obviously at the front end of their design. Their design may not be mature and ready to go to tier 1. We have a case now where the tier 1 plan of record is moving to the right, mostly because of stability. And so they stay satisfied using our facilities until they're ready to really move to a tier 1.
I think that one of the things you obviously is you're a lot more agile than some of these tier 1s. But you know, the tier 1s are changing their business model. They're using a lot of automation now to reduce their machine downtime, to improve their quality systems and all the rest of it. And by doing so, they're going to be, you know, opening up these razor thin margins they've been working on. You know, I think that has to filter down at some point to the you know, tier 2s and 3s, the space that you guys are in. Michael Hinshaw, have you got a view on that?
Yeah, I do. I agree with you. I don't know that the margins are necessarily expanding, but we're seeing differentiation in the value proposition. Higher complexity is starting to get a little bit more margin and value than lower complexity. It sounds intuitive, but in my experience and what I've seen over the last couple of years, particularly in the EMS side, there are high level of competition, lots of players in the sector. And it strikes me that the OEMs are starting to recognize and differentiate across the types of EMSs that handle their different levels of complexity and are willing to pay for it, which implicitly suggests that they're actually getting some margin on their end for the same sort of thing. And I've seen that to be true of even the consumer companies as well as defense and aerospace.
Interesting. Yeah. Michael Wallace, have you got a view on that particular?
Yeah, it seems that the tier 1s, you know, they're not buying up capacity of other EMS companies anymore. When they make an acquisition, it tends to be a technology or an OEM. You know, where, you know, a couple of examples for me were, you know, growing up as a kid, I had a Sharp television. I remember. Sharp is owned by Foxconn, you know, and you know, and so they're, you know, they're an OEM, EMS, you know, so the big guys are really blending that line between ODM and OEM and EMS. I mean, it's, what are they? And it is, but we're also buying up, you know, technology like power, you know, the EV market needs power, you know, devices, and so they're, you know, they're making strategic investments in some of those sub components, call it.
I think we have to make some differentiation here when we talk tier 1 and OEMs. If we and take out someone like automotive, and make them a separate class because they're bypassing their tier ones and buying components and making direct deals for chips, such as GM and Ford just did. In our case, that's not the case. They're still going through the tier ones and all. So for medical, military, high-tech communications, I think you're right. But for automotive and consumer products, I don't know.
Right. That's a good point. That's a good point. So coming right to my final question, and I'll start off with Michael Wallace. I know I know your answer to this already, but is materials management more important than process automation?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, first of all, you can't build it if you don't have the parts for it. But the automation equipment, when outsourcing really began in the 80s, has gotten better and better and better every year. So if you're gonna be an OEM, going back to the title of this topic here, and they want to bring it back in house, you're not doing it because you can make it better than an EMS company can. You're just not going to. And then you're gonna have to spend a lot of money to it. So if you do your benefits versus your risks, your benefits are all on the making side. Don't bring it in house. Outsource it. That's where your benefits are. The risks is loss of control, and that's where, to me, that's why you have to manage your own supply chain. Yeah. And if you're doing that with your partner, now you're handling the material side, and that's a wash. The cost is the cost. Right. One last question I didn't answer before is I share costed bombs directly. The costed bomb of the full material, if it's not ITAR, and there's an MSA behind it, service agreement behind it. Yeah. Because that allows us to establish standard costs for that product. And if there's a variance we have to buy through a broker, then that's recognized in the MSA, who's going to be responsible for that. Because at some point, the prices could go back down. And we've already seen PPV going both ways. And so it's to me, that also shows, is it a partnership or not? If they're going to get into that level of the depth.
So that's really the sorry. Yeah. So it sounds like that's the ideal partnership, as you say, to have for them to take on a lot of the cost of the holding the components and the parts and have an open relationship in that respect.
That's similar to what a lot of the chemical producers did when the cost of certain materials went up. Rather than raise price, they put on a surcharge, particularly with petrochemicals or precious metals, which went up and which down and were shared and eventually leveled out. And I think that's a very good approach.
Right. Okay. Jim, would you concur with that?
Yeah, I think it's an issue of timing right now because of the supply chain constraints. So material management is still number one. We're doing more agreements now than ever, buying parts, moving upstream with our partners, whether they're stocking agreements, MSAs, ESAs. They're contracts which allow us to be closer and closer to their purchasing to get parts in-house. For now, I think it'll exist for the next couple of years in terms of investment in supporting just getting the parts into our factory and making sure they can get product. Today's critical component is still schedule, getting product out to the customer.
Right. Okay. Before I finish off with Michael Wallace, I want to just make a quick announcement to the audience we do have. If anybody's got any questions, please put them in the Q&A box, and we'll be happy to answer them shortly. Coming back to you, Michael Hinshaw, do you want to finish up on your response to this?
Yeah, I concur. I think short-term materials management is key, but that's going to ebb away here in the pretty near future. And I think for long-term competitiveness and to be able to keep onshore and keep the momentum with bringing production back to North America, automation is going to be a critical component of that. Labor costs have continued to decline on a relative basis because of automation, but the price of labor is going to continue to go up. So that's something we're going to have to solve.
Okay. Right. So, I mean, I think the I'm trying to see if I've got any questions here. I don't have anything coming in yet. So if nobody's got any questions, I'll ask one final one, and that is that obviously with the complexity in the factory growing with materials management systems, process control systems, etc. All of them driven by data. Do you need to? Is this something that you're going to have to upskill your production manager to learn and interpret, or are you going to have to start looking at hiring, a data analyst basically in-house to be able to crunch this information to make it into something that's actionable? Who wants to pick up on that?
Well, I think data is critical. And if you can start off with the ODB plus data right from your customer's CAD system, where you have pretty much everything. You have your design files, you have your raw board data, you have all those materials. And you can populate the systems that you're talking about correctly up front. So we're at a different stage of EMS. Back in the old days, you're kind of incrementally improving the IT tools. Now they're pretty good if you have good data. And so after that, with the APIs that you're talking about with CalcuQuote and other companies, Silicon Expert and others, that's where to me, where the commingling of the systems is. We're integrating those systems. The production managers can be given reports. They don't have to be IT guys, but the organization needs a good IT group. Though. I think an IT analyst or a CIO even at a big company is huge in an EMS space. Data driven, no doubt.
Right. But it's not going to come down to your size of business, no?
Well, data is data. We decisions are made on that, and the better data you have, the better decisions you can make.
Okay, so Jim, back to you. I mean, you think your production managers are capable of handling all the interpreting the data, the absolute massive data that's coming off of some of these systems now?
Yeah, so we're involved in an awful lot of group projects that involve operations through IT, through finance. The whole company right now is going through continuous improvement on the data management and whether it's the ERP or MRP systems, to make sure that we understand exactly what's going on in the factory. Again, whether it's working going through the factory, whether it's inventory, we're spending an awful lot more resources now on the tools and the data, and then informing the workforce. So that becomes if you will, it's an automatic upgrade because they're part of our process.
Right. I mean, Michael Hinshaw, I mean, one of the issues I've seen over the years is that every time you go into a contract manufacturer, 9 times out of 10, they've got their own homegrown system that they guard very jealously and regard it as their IP, if you like, but because of like IPC, CFX and other standardization and systems that are coming in, it's kind of guiding you guys towards having to use some of the mainstream MES and process control systems that are out there. I mean, what's your take on this?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, from our perspective, we're expanding our data analysis capabilities. We're bringing in talent that can handle the types of things, not just from a production planning standpoint, but inventory controls. I mean, if you're low volume, high mix, you're seeing a lot of materials flow through the plant, particularly at our size. And so we have to have much tighter control. CMMC is requiring security. ITAR is requiring that we have tighter control over both access to information. So we are in the process of migrating to another solution, because I think we're stepping up in our scale. There's no question in my mind that the market wasn't terribly well served many years ago for ERP and MRP systems, because what we do is a little different from other types of manufacturing. I've seen many types, but now the market is coming to us with the tools we can use. So we're going to make a change.
Yeah. Okay. Last word to you, Gene.
Well, this raises another issue, and perhaps the independent EMS company, or perhaps a group of them, should be hiring analytics specialists to interpret this all the stream of data, much like Pipelet, the United Technologies has done now. They've set up separate departments who do nothing but take this tremendous amount of data and say, what does it mean? What action should be taken? What is the history? What is the forecast using AI going forward? So this is going to open up a new demand and probably a requirement to add staff just to do that.
Yeah, I think it's only going to get the amount of data is only going to get increase. It's only going to get more, and I think probably right. Okay, gentlemen. Well, I think we've had a great debate this morning. We should have had a bigger audience, but we'll certainly be promoting this over our channels over the next few weeks. So I want to thank you all very much for taking part. Jim Apfel from Naprotek, Gene Weiner from Gene Weiner International Associates, Michael Wallace from Urtech Manufacturing, and of course, Michael Hinshaw from Green Circuits. Thank you, gentlemen, for taking part, and thank you to our audience for watching today.